So this is member providers and the high cost of U.S. healthcare. And some people, you might be thinking, this is Sunday. Why aren't we talking about the uninsured? I think the uninsured the rate of uninsurance is extremely important. The U.S. percentage of people who are uninsured is about 9%, and unfortunately in Texas it's actually 18%. We can talk about that later too. But I've come to the belief that the reason a good portion of people don't have health insurance is because the cost of health insurance premiums is based on the cost of health care. And the cost of healthcare is escalating way too quickly. And if we can focus on slowing that down, we can actually do something about improving our uninsurance problem in the long term. So let's go ahead and move on from there. Next slide, please. So I borrowed some slides from a wonderful speaker that we had at the Baker Institute named Limor Daphne. She's actually from Houston. But she's at the Harvard Business School, and she gave a talk at the Baker Institute. I'm welcome. Happy to send you these slides later so you could actually look at her presentation. But so we start just with some background, first in terms of the U.S. healthcare system. We have Medicare and Medicaid, which provide about half of our health insurance. Even with those public programs, they depend strongly on the private sector. They are actually run by the U.S. government, giving private insurers the power to sell policies to Americans. So some of you have Medicare Advantage programs, and those are sold by private health insurance companies. I'm sure you figured that out. But we also have Medicaid managed care. For example, I sit on the board of Community Health Choice, which is Harris County's private health insurance company. And so if we have and you're welcome. Questions from
I'm glad to know you're on that board.
If we are talking about private providers offering products, what we want is competition in the healthcare market. You want vigorous competition because that's, in general, sort of economics 101. The way to keep prices down is to have competitors trying to offer products at the lowest possible price. And of course, with government, there is government oversight in there trying to guarantee the measure of quality. So that means that we want lots of small buyers, lots of small providers, smaller insurance companies, that would compete against each other and smaller providers. But unfortunately, there's lots of consolidation going on. Let me show you some background on that. Next slide, please. So before we get started, I feel like we're missing some slides, but maybe that's odd. Could you just click through to two and three? Oh yeah, no, we're getting there. Okay. Yeah.
Just quickly make sure
they're there. It's fine.
All right, good. Sorry, the screen. I hadn't done so. All right.
Yeah. So before we get started, I'm going to be talking about two types of consolidation of providers. The standard is horizontal mergers. So that might be a number of individual physician groups combining together to perform a larger physician group, or a number of hospitals joining together to create a healthcare system. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about something called vertical integration, and that would be when a hospital decides to buy up a number of physician groups and turn them into employees. And for the first time, I think it's last year, there are actually more physicians who are working as employees of hospitals rather than running their own businesses. Next slide, please. So here's an example of what's going on in terms of horizontal integration amongst hospitals. So this is the percentage of U.S. hospital bed capacity that belongs to a health system. So multiple, and in some cases we have systems that own more than 100 hospitals and are operating them all across the country. But you see now we're at 81% of our bed capacity in the United States that is controlled by healthcare systems. Next slide, please. And also, what you can see is there are particular markets. I'm referring to hospital referral regions. This is a term created by the Dartmouth Atlas, which sort of defines particular markets across the country based on patient flow. So Houston has a hospital referral region. I believe it includes Sugar Land. The greater Houston area is part of our hospital referral region. But you can see that the two largest healthcare systems in most of these markets in the country now have a substantial amount of market share, 75% of market share in those markets. And there are now, unfortunately, a quarter of our major cities that don't have an independent hospital operating it, which is not something that we expected 20 years ago to happen. Next slide, please.
Does Houston have an independent hospital, and what would that be?
It does. I was looking at some of the data on these, and I can't remember some of their names.
There was another one that's not
yeah, they're closed out, and they were actually, so they're technically not an independent hospital because there's three of them. There were three together in the story.
Right.
Yeah. But I know there were some, and I just, I never come across, what is it? Might be a physician's hospital. Yeah, I could tell you that later, but there's actually surprisingly enough. Yeah, there's three or four of them. Which is, yeah.
At the top thing, I'm sorry, just to make sure I see the top graph is basically what I'm saying. Lutheran Methodist have 75% more.
Correct. Which is, so we are not one of those cities because we have Houston Methodist, Memorial Hermann, and CHI St. Luke's.
Right.
So
there's HCA.
Yes, and the HCA hospital. So we are
top two do not make up the
Correct. But I'll show you some differences in prices, which we still have a significant problem with consolidation affecting our prices. This is an older graph because Lamar Daphne created this whole presentation a while ago. It just shows you the consolidation amongst the major insurers. And Anthem has now changed their name to Elevance. And you sort of wonder why. I thought, maybe it's because they got too much bad press under the name Anthem. Maybe they thought the name change would help. But these numbers continue to, you'll just sort of fewer insurers then disappearing and then acquiring other insurers, things like that. So actually, community health choice in Houston, it's an extremely rare phenomenon. You do not see this sort of county-owned insurance company in many major cities because they've just been competed out of business. Next slide, please. So there might be, some people say, well, yes, but sometimes consolidation and mergers is a good thing. And that's certainly true. You can imagine if you have an individual physician trying to run their own office and how difficult that could be. And then if you had multiple physicians gathering together, well, they could share a receptionist. They could share someone who does all the purchasing. They could share a physician's assistant. So certainly there are cases when mergers actually can reduce costs. And it's also possible that the merger leads to better quality that is also worth the higher price. And so, for example, there are many examples of physicians where you might have 3 or 4 general practitioners, and then they will bring in specialists, say in rheumatology and cardiology, other common specialties, and so that you have this physician practice and people like it because they know that they can get the care regardless of how serious the problem is that they have. And so that would be a justification for a higher price. What I'm more concerned about is the case where you have a number of providers who are coming together, and because they are larger, they're more forceful in their negotiations. And so they can ask for higher prices. And I'll just show you, I'll sort of show you some information on how that happens. And, I won't spend much time on this, but there's not much I'm going to talk about on pharmaceuticals today. I'm certainly happy to discuss it with you later, but you could even have we have vertical integration in our large pharmaceutical industry. Essentially, when you think about it, there's lots of small biotech companies that make new discoveries that are just marvelous, but when they find them, they immediately turn around and sell them to Merck or Pfizer or something like that, because there's the R&D and then there's the marketing portion of it. And it just turns out that it's better in terms of business strategy for all of that to be run by a large firm. Next slide, please. So just, these are some examples that are more than gave. I can certainly give you other ones, but you can have these hospital physician partnerships that are. You can have, Vivian actually specializes in renal dialysis care. They can partner with healthcare providers. I forget, they're not incredibly gigantic. Then you have providers collaborating with insurance companies to sell particular plans. And so you can see, for example, Prevalence started collaborating with Cedars-Sinai, UCLA, to try and sell an insurance product that sort of provides specialty access to the providers. And then, some other examples. There's lots of them. The one I find so fascinating, have you heard of Optum? Yeah, so they're owned by United Healthcare, and they are taking a very aggressive approach in terms of acquiring physician practices. So my 95-year-old mother, her doctor just moved to an Optum healthcare plan. And so the thing I find really fascinating about this is I would think that then the insurance company would have an incentive to try and get the physicians to lower their costs to attract more customers and provide services more efficiently, not send your patients unnecessarily to expensive surgical procedures in the most expensive hospitals. Maybe try and shop around to lower cost hospitals with higher quality. But it doesn't seem to have happened, as Optum has grown, it's not as if our healthcare costs have slowed down. So that's a puzzle. Next slide, please. So just showing you I'm just citing some of the studies that show, there have been a number of top economists who looked at mergers of hospitals across the country. They have found that they do raise prices, sometimes to double digits. They can raise the prices for overnight stays in the hospital. They raise prices for outpatient care provided by hospitals, care where you don't stay overnight, dialysis. And then it's not just that. The insurers, when they merge, they also will raise their prices. They'll raise the prices that they're charging to us to pay for our insurance premium. So any type of consolidation, while there is economic reason to say it should lower costs, so that these companies might be able to achieve economies of scale and lower their unit costs, that may all be happening, but it's not being passed on to us as the consumer. Okay, next slide. It's going to the shareholders. Yes, it is going to the shareholders, but it's not any better in nonprofit healthcare system, unfortunately, where there is no share. That's the weird thing. Yeah, it's very weird. So this is just more studies if you get interested and look later. But let me jump to this particular study. Journal of Health Affairs is the one all the policy wonks like to read. And this study had quite an impact. It was done by the main author was Zach Cooper at Yale, and so this is titled "Hospital Prices Grew Substantially Faster than Physician Prices." Next slide, please. And the data goes from 2007 to 2014 because they got access to a massive data set that included all the prices of people who had United Healthcare insurance. And if you took this data set and continued out until now, the pattern would have continued, but unfortunately, United Healthcare decided not to let anybody have their insurance claim. And so now they've substituted with Blue Cross Blue Shield claims, but it will never be able to sort of do the entire line again. But yeah.
So what is the hospital? What is that?
So what they, and I'm glad you asked that. So they have access to everybody's claim to file for an overnight stay in the hospital. And they went year by year, and they also standardize, there's a way to standardize by a case mix, because you know that the severity of the patients and the types of cases that what happened for COVID, completely different. And they extract it over time.
But what I mean is, a person stays in the hospital, they have insurance, 90% of us do have insurance. These are people who are insured. These are the prices that insured people are paying.
So Medicare and Medicaid, there are control on the prices. This is commercial insurance, and it's the amount that the hospital is doing not charge, which is substantially higher. It's the amount that was
So this is the amount of money that the hospital got from both the insurance company and the person who stayed there. A combination of the insurance payment and the out-of-pocket cost. What is the decision?
Excuse me, Vivian. This is Federico in Houston. I'm joining you from home on the phone. We cannot hear the questions that people ask on the floor. It's impossible. There is too much distortion. Could you repeat the questions before you answer them?
Yes, thank you. That's a good idea. So I'm talking about hospital prices, and the question is, what do I mean by a price? And so I'm explaining that the price is the amount that the provider, the hospital in this case, received from the insurance company and the patient, because the patient is going to have a copay. Now, then the question is, that's a hospital price, but then a physician price, it's the exact same thing. It's the amount that the physician receives from the insurance company and the patient. Yeah, and remember now, when you've got these physicians employed, what happens is their boss is billing, the healthcare system is billing the insurance company, but it's, you know, the same kind of thing that's going on. Okay, so what the slide is saying is that you've got hospital prices that grew 42% and physician prices grew 18%. And so that's for inpatient, that's an overnight stay. And then outpatient means anything where you go to a hospital for care, but then you don't stay overnight. So it could be anything from just a diagnostic x-ray all the way to, you know, a knee replacement where you don't stay overnight. Okay, so it's a lot of things, but you still have the same thing. The hospital prices grew much faster than the physician prices. Next slide, please. And so this is just part of their abstract and the conclusion. What they're saying is we really should be focusing on hospital price growth and not so much focusing on what is going on the physician side in terms of price growth. And then there's various suggestions for how you could do that. We could discuss that later if we have time. Next slide, please. So why is this so important? What is the impact on your average American family? So the orange and yellow lines are showing you what is the increase in the last 20 years or so in insurance premiums for, you know, family health insurance. And then also, you might say, well, okay, the premium is increasing, but you have the employer paying part of it, so it's fine, right? Well, one of those lines is also showing you the amount that the family is paying out of their pocket for their premium. So here we are, we're talking about 300% growth over 20 years. And you compare that to the blue lines, and that's our increase in our wages over time, and that's about 100%. So we've had this massive increase in the amount that the average American has to pay out of pocket for their health insurance premiums. And I'm saying that is primarily driven by our increases in hospital prices. And it's not something that the public really understands. Lots of health economists understand it. We're just trying to figure out what to do about it. Next slide, please. So really, this is just to say, this is about employer provided health insurance, and it varies by state. We're kind of, where are we, about in the 45? So you might say, well, that's less than 50% of our coverage, but it is the most expensive by far, and so that's why it's so important in terms of trying to control healthcare costs. Next slide.
I'm sorry, say that again, go back. I did not understand. This is in Texas between 43.9% and 48.7% of employers pay insurance premiums for their employees.
Okay, so the question is what does the sort of color, the blue shade color for Texas actually mean? And what it means is that between 43% and 48% of Texans have employer-sponsored insurance. So slightly different from what you're thinking, because if you are a parent and you cover your children with your employer's health insurance policy, you are considered as having employer-sponsored insurance.
So this is the percentage of people who have health insurance paid for by their employer.
Yes, yes, and sort of. Yeah, it's interesting. You think in the broader picture, we talk about Texas having such a great economic environment and we're friendly for business. Well, I don't know, if we're so friendly for business, why isn't Texas, like a dark shade of blue in this graph? So you wonder what is going on in terms of our decisions. Next slide, please. And so then we go ahead and have a pandemic, and there are studies that have shown that a good deal of, the federal government wanted to take care of healthcare providers, of course, and certainly they needed a great deal of support and appreciation for what they did. But so when the legislation was first passed, there was a concern that everybody lost revenue in the first few weeks because everybody who had something other than COVID was so afraid to go to the doctor that they didn't. So there was no income going into the healthcare system. And so Congress said, well, we got to compensate these providers for the income that they lost. And so we passed the CARES Act, and lots of billions of dollars was going out the door. So the federal government had to figure out really quickly how to divvy up this money. And unfortunately, what they did, there's a published study in the Journal of American Medical Association about this. They said, well, okay, because there were places that lost more business, we're going to allocate the money according to what your revenues were before the pandemic hit. Well, okay, when you think about that, if you were a healthcare system that because of your market power, you got to charge very high prices, you actually received more money from the federal government to compensate you. And if you charge lower prices, you got less money. And so we had some of the most powerful healthcare systems sitting around with large cash reserves. HCA felt so bad about it that they sent their money back to the federal government. Others didn't, and I'm saying nonprofit systems didn't, and used that money to buy up physician practices. And I don't know if you know people, but I would talk with individual, like my son's at school and the other mom is an independent physician, and well, that used to be an independent physician practice, and then because they ran out, they had no income, so they had to sell. So they sold to Village Medical, which then got sold to One Medical or something. And so this just gives you some headlines of some of the mergers that occurred during this time. Next slide, please. And so part of the No Surprises Act, the federal government funded a study to look at the amount of consolidation, and this is what came out of it. Next slide, please. This is just the top of a very detailed table that goes on for 2.5 pages. But sort of the top, some of the, the top people at RAND, they got together, everybody doing work on healthcare consolidation in the country. And we had, multiple Zoom meetings and talked about the literature. And they concluded what the evidence is. And so you see for the hospital market, we know that if there is consolidation of hospitals, that healthcare prices increase, healthcare spending, which is price times quantity, also increases. There's mixed results on what happens to the quality of care because there's multiple studies, and sometimes the quality goes up, sometimes it goes down, sometimes it doesn't change at all. There's possible evidence that patient access to care decreases, and certainly healthcare wages decrease as well. So you have a larger healthcare system, and they're bargaining with the nurses union and say, oh, well, we're bigger. We don't have to offer you the wage increase you're asking for. And so the wages don't increase as much. Next slide, please. And so there's just lots of other studies, and they just sort of note that there's still plenty of research to be done on these other areas of consolidation that you can see. There are quite a few. Okay, so just going back to Econ 101, you remember the downward sloping demand curve, right? And and so this is what we usually expect in a well-functioning market. If the price increases a bit from P sub 0 to P sub 1, you should see a substantial drop in demand. That people respond to higher prices and they don't buy as much of expensive things. Next slide, please. So what happens in terms of, when are we supposed to end?
10:30. Yeah, we have 29 minutes.
Okay, yeah. So what happens for employers who buy insurance coverage for their employees, they don't necessarily go out and buy an insurance policy, kind of like you would if you were an individual. What they do is any company that has 50 or more individuals will generally say, we're big enough to manage the risks of insurance. So we're going to do something called self-insure, but they do need an insurance company to go out and negotiate the prices with all the providers. If you have 50 workers, you don't want to be negotiating with Memorial Hermann and Houston Methodist and everyone else for the prices you'll pay. So you pay the insurer to do that, and then all of your workers receive a card. Rice, I work at Rice, and we self-insure, but I get a card from Aetna, and then Aetna processes all the paperwork, and that's called an ASO policy, Administrative Services Unlimited. So Aetna is just an administrator. Okay, so and then what Aetna can do is they have Rice as a customer, and they have plenty of other companies in Houston as their customers. And then they can go to CHI St. Luke's and say, okay, I now have 10,000 potential customers, and I'm going to negotiate a hospital price with you. And I'd like to be that as low as possible. All right. So you think this might be a good thing that these insurers can go with and have these big, large numbers of potential customers and negotiate good prices for us. Next slide. So particularly, prior to all the inflation and in the midst of the pandemic, the problem was the war for talent. All right. So every employer is trying to get lots of employees coming to them, and they do not want health insurance to be a barrier. They want to make sure that everybody's happy, they have access to every provider they could possibly want, and life is good. And so what happens is these contracts between the insurance company and the healthcare systems, they get renegotiated every 3-4 years. Usually one of the sides gets unhappy and says, it's time for us to talk this over again. And so they have the discussion. And then you'll see in the paper, or you'll get a note from your employer saying, we just wanted to let you know that things aren't going well, and so you may be out of network. Memorial Hermann may be removed from our network in a few months, and you just wanted you to know that. Okay. And then, or it's in the paper, and then I get called and I have to make some sort of comment about what's going on. And so, the thing is, when the insurance company, just fair disclosure, I'm on the community advisory board for Blue Cross Blue Shield Texas. So I do hear what happens. And, so they'll say, look, we've got a problem with Baylor, Scott and White, here in Dallas. They're not negotiating. They call up the companies and they say, you have to be willing to go out of network for 3 months to make the hospitals lower their prices or not increases our prices. Because, the last time around, I forget who it was, but, someone was asking for, substantial increases in prices of say 7 or 8%. And the insurer didn't want to do that. Okay. And so you try and calm the employers down, but the problem is the HR office is suddenly hearing all these phone calls. What do you mean? I just scheduled my knee replacement next month and you're telling me they're out of network? And so then the HR person just gets, at some point just says, I can't take it anymore. And so they call up the insurance company and say, just give it to them, just go ahead. And so this is what happens. And the insurance company has to sort of keep the employer happy, because otherwise the employer can pick up and move to the other insurance company. They're worried about this too. And they said, fine, so we'll increase the price. So then end up with a demand curve like this. Okay. Which means you have the price, if you can remember, compared to the last graph. But because we call this demand curve inelastic, there's only a small decrease in the quantity. And because of that, this is the demand curve that the hospital sees and says, I can just keep raising prices. I might lose a few customers, but I'm going to be doing fine because I'm going to make a huge increase in profits. And it keeps iterating over and over like this. And so some of us have high deductible plans. Okay. But the co-insurance rates, they're extremely small. All right. So maybe you hit a $1,000 deductible, but if you need an operation that's several $1,000s, the insurance company is going to pick it up. You're not going to see it. And you're like, well, I don't care what the price is. I want my surgery where I want my surgery. And that's where my doctor told me to go. And oh, by the way, the doctor is employed now. So the Methodist physician will send you to the Methodist hospital, which is also a higher price. But you don't care because that's where your doctor told you to send you. Okay, next slide, please. Pardon? Yes, exactly. We all think someone else is paying, but the problem is we're paying.
Okay.
Yeah, because then it goes into the premiums for the next year. So I think this just kind of says what I just said. Thank you. So the way around this, so hospital price transparency and provider price transparency. I don't know. It may be the one good thing that came out of the Trump administration. This was something that happened, started by executive order. So starting in January 2021, you will find this. This is from the Center in Medicare and Medicaid Services website. So most institutions in the U.S. are licensed as hospitals. They have to post standard charges, and there's definitions, and you'll see in a minute. Next slide, please. Just shows you. So every hospital is supposed to report 2 sets of prices. One, a machine readable file, okay, of all of their discounted cash prices and their negotiated prices with insurers, not just charges, but actual, this is how much the provider is going to get paid from the insurance company and the insuree. Okay. And then something consumer friendly, which is some like 300 shoppable services, and 75 are standard across all the hospitals. And then the hospital can choose the other 225. Next slide, please. And then it's not just the hospitals that have to post. The insurance companies are also required to post this, but because it's so many more prices, it's so much more complicated. That just started in January of this year. Okay. So, requirements for insurers to follow as well. Next slide, please. So what happens is if you go to any one of the major hospitals, the law says on the home page, you should be able to find something about prices. And so you see, I've circled in the top right corner, pricing transparency, and you can go there, you just type in Houston Methodist, and you can, click on that. So if I click on that, next slide, I will get to a page that looks like this, and it lists their machine readable files and for every single hospital in the Houston Methodist system. And this was last summer. So I got called by Public Rate, KUHF, and they said, oh, there's support saying that that hospitals aren't complying. And what do you think? And I said, oh, I'll just type this and see what's going on. And then I found this. I thought, wow, this is terrific. So then I click on the very top one, Houston Methodist. And this is what I got. And if you know anything about computer programming, usually when you get something like this, you also get a guidebook that it's documentation that tells you these are the names of the variables and these are the fields. And when you get that, then you're okay. But there was no guidebook. I was very fortunate. I had an extremely talented undergraduate. She went to the library, and it turned out there were programmers who were able to decipher this. And so, next slide, please. And so we got files of various sorts from Methodist and Memorial Hermann and CHI St. Luke's. And St. Luke's actually had an Excel spreadsheet. It was unlike, and Memorial Hermann was kind of in between. And then so we lined up some of the services and prices. Lots of things were missing, okay? And we did not get 300 services, or they were required in the machine readable files to post prices for everything, and everything was not there. But so we published an issue brief last fall, and here you can see just prices for a certain number of services that you see for Blue Cross Blue Shield Texas and United Healthcare. And you can see which insurance policy you have has an important effect. And also there's very different pricing. So Houston Methodist with Blue Cross Blue Shield Texas, for these 139 services, their average prices are more than twice as high as St. Luke's. And same thing for United Healthcare. And then it's also, which policy you choose differs. Next slide, please. This is another way to stack the data, and you can see which places were the highest price for these services. In this case, Memorial Hermann ended up having the highest price with Blue Cross Blue Shield Texas, 2/3 of the cases. Next slide. For United Healthcare, kind of a different story. So, there's just all these kind of strange things going on behind the scenes in terms of negotiation that lead to very different prices. But we should care about this, right? Because we are not necessarily picking the best insurance policy and the best providers to go to. I would argue that all three of these providers are excellent, right? So there's not that much question about differences in quality. But here we've got dramatically different changes in prices. So what am I going to do with this? I have to finish teaching 2 courses this semester and get that out of the way. I plan to spend a lot of time after that talking with my own colleagues at Rice and trying to convince them that maybe we should change our insurance policy a little bit to be more price sensitive. And this is hard. I'm asking my own colleagues to put more skin in the game. But there are things that have been tried in other parts of the country. For example, I'm not saying you should take Houston Methodist out of our network. That's just not going to work, right? But suppose we did something that said, okay, you can still go to Houston Methodist, but our normal co-insurance rate for hospital outpatient care is 15%. But if you choose Houston Methodist, insurance rate will be 10%. Okay, so we're going to make it slightly more expensive and also get better quality measures. So everybody sees quality measures from the different providers. And just on the margin, shift a few customers to think more carefully and say, well, maybe I don't need to go to Houston Methodist for, you may, if you want complicated brain surgery, you're probably going to want to go there anyways, right? But for more of the common things, maybe you won't, right? And it has been found if in other places, shift away 2% of the customer base, that's enough to make the hospital think twice. All right, and then they don't raise their prices much. Yeah.
I have a proposal that no one will like, but maybe we could comment on that.
You want to go a little closer?
Yes. So suppose starting next year, 5% of the premium.
No, I'll
Okay.
take it inside.
I'll repeat the question once he's finished. Just give me a minute.
So right now, employers pay, and maybe I'm not correct. But I believe that employers pay premiums for their employees. Employers deduct that premium as from their revenue to reduce their income, to reduce their taxes. But the employee receives that benefit tax-free.
Yes.
We don't pay and receive health insurance from our employer to the tune of $10,000 or $20,000 a year of cost to the employer that it deducts. We don't have to pay income tax on that benefit. That's one reason we don't care how much our employer pays, because we have no skin in the game. But if starting next year, 5% of that premium, became a taxable benefit to us, and we had to pay income taxes on that. And for 20 years, then the next year be 10%. Over 20 years, we start making that a taxable benefit to the employee. Then the employee starts to care a lot about that benefit and how much it costs the employer and how much, ultimately it costs us all. That's a thought.
Right. So, okay. So the question or the proposal, there was a proposal here to how to deal with this issue and change consumers' behavior. And so one recognizes that we receive these this health insurance benefit from our employer tax-free. The value of it is not added on to our income tax. We only pay income tax on our wages, right? And so the proposal is, why don't we start taxing this a bit? And so the way it works, it certainly would, what it would do is it would mean that employers and workers would want less of their compensation in health insurance because suddenly it's more expensive to us. And then that means we demand less generous health insurance, and that reduces demand. So I agree that would work. The problem was it was part of Obamacare. It was the Cadillac tax. The Cadillac tax was, we're going to say, once your insurance premium is over, I forget what it is, like $25,000 for a family or four, you're going to have to pay a tax on that, the additional amount. I gave talks all over, and I would say, this is what the Cadillac tax is. How many people are for it? No one raised their hand. Yeah. And, I couldn't get every audience I spoke to. Ooh, Cadillac tax. The minute I hear tax, just get rid of it. And so it worked. And every economist, regardless of political stripe, was in favor of it, Democratic and Republicans. And the public, we never got it because the public just would not go for it. There's another suggestion, we can talk about that later, that I think might work, but it's extremely radical. And the other thing is that I've met this, I came across a company called Talon, and what they do is you need a brain MRI, and so you're in your doctor's office. Oh, I got to get a brain MRI. You pull up this app on your phone. You type in brain MRI. It knows your zip code because you've entered that information, and then it pulls up all the places that will do that brain MRI in Houston, and it gives you a dollar value. What the app does is it finds all the providers of a certain level of quality that are below the median price, and then it offers you a dollar amount that it will deposit in your health savings account if you go to that provider. And if you go to a lower cost provider, it gives you more money. So this is a company that's mostly been working with smaller employers because it's hard to get these HSAs going in larger employers. So it's getting more popular. So we're going to study it and see if it works. So give more price shopping power to the consumer. We have something called ACOs, Accountable Care Organizations, and they share savings. Medicare shares the savings with the providers that lower their costs. And I'm saying, well, let's have an ACO for patients. So if they're saving, share it with us. and then we're going to care. And hopefully that will change things. So I will just wrap up. Provider consolidation is driving up prices of healthcare costs. And the major there's consolidation everywhere, but it's hospital consolidation that I'm most interested in addressing. And we are making prices more transparent. It's just going to take a while. And I think the only way to slow this growth down is actually working with employers and employees to get us to change our behavior. Question?
Yeah, there's always on a statement from the insurer, what the providers charge, what is actually paid, there's a huge disparity. So when hospitals post their prices, are they posting what they charge or what they, how do you know what?
Yes, that's a good question. So if you go down into the detail, they are posting what they're asked, what they would like in if they could ask for all the money in the world. And they are posting for each insurance company the actual price, the actual dollar amounts negotiated and exchanged between the provider and
If somebody's not insured, are they charged the whole thing?
So if you are not insured, it really depends on how badly behaved your hospital is. Unfortunately, there are some hospitals that they should post a charity policy and they should abide by it, but sometimes they post the charity policy, and if the patient doesn't know about it, they will charge whatever, the hospital will charge whatever it wants. That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, and then they start trying to negotiate one-on-one with the hospital to get it down.
Yes, definitely. That's a good idea.
You can do it, but it's a pain, what process.
Yeah, there's a whole podcast about it, Arm and a Leg. I highly recommend it. Question in the back.
Super, thanks, that was super interesting. In the graphic from 2007 to 2018, and the increased cost of hospitals where, while the physician costs remain similar, is that likely because of one of the few factors is that like some of the cares that we have, so I don't have much history in the American healthcare system, but it's some of the cares now they have the PAs and their RNs and NPs, so it's being passed into the employees of the hospital. Or is it because the end physicians are now, as I mentioned, they're becoming employees of the hospital? So that could, how much of that increase in price is actually an increase in wages that has been shifted from the independent provider to the hospital, pay that to their employees? Or is that completely wrong?
Yeah, okay, so it could get quite complicated. So you're wondering, would a physician who then switches over to working for a hospital, are they suddenly getting the 42% increase in salary?
I don't have the 42% increase now in salary, but some of it, some of the cost is now, the salary isn't necessarily going up, so they may even get a lower salary, but the cost is shifting from independent to collegiate.
Yeah, it is. None of the workers are getting this increase in prices. None of them, not the nurse. So everyone's talking about, yes, we have a hard time hiring nurses post-COVID. I totally agree with that. And we are paying them more, but it is not at all close to the amount that you're seeing in these hospital prices.
No.
So.
No, I understand, but I was just wondering if we're employing physicians now, is that just a different funnel?
Just a different
funnel of money, or just changing the circle?
Second line of business
for the hospital?
Yeah, for the hospital that buys into physician practice, it's just a second line of business including referral network internally to drive business to the hospital.
Yes. So I published a different article in Health Affairs that looked at changes in changes in profits over the past 10 years, and how much of that has gone to charity care and how much of it has gone to cash reserves, which is the bank account for the hospital. And so profits have increased. That's definitely for sure. There is no increase in charity care, and there are massive increases in cash reserves. So what do you think is the size of the cash reserves for Houston Methodist? Just throw a number out.
$1 billion.
$1 billion. That's a big number.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to guess?
Bigger.
How much bigger?
It's like $1 billion.
It's 7 billion. 7 billion, okay? So you need, each one of these hospitals, they need $1 billion in case COVID happens, right? Because everything shuts down and you need to take care of patients. So I understand $1 billion, but they have 7 billion. CHI St. Luke's, I think, is somewhere between 1 and 2 billion. Memorial Hermann is a little bit higher. MD Anderson, $10 billion, and they don't take care of Texas Medicaid patients. Comment, yes.
There are ways that economists and business school people analyze the profitability of companies. And some companies are more profitable than other companies by various ways of measuring this. And some would say that it's an abnormal increase, difference in profitability for like a level of risk or whatever. Are the hospital companies abnormally profitable? They're profitable. They're more profitable. What is it? Abnormally high.
It is abnormally high. When you see, we looked up in other business documents about how much do you need to maintain a AA bond rating, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're well above that level, their cash reserves. And what do? They use this money, well, in low interest rate environments, they borrow against it so that they can build, facilities in places where they currently aren't, so that they can expand the size of their market and generate even more market power.
So they are abnormal.
Yes. Yeah. So, and you can see that in the New York Times, they've had a whole series of articles on this, the Wall Street Journal. Yeah.
How useful is it when you read the Houston Chronicle that someone's making an abnormal profit? Is that like, oh no, Kaiser made 180% last year? Is that something you take seriously, or is it something you'd have to understand in context? Or
Oh yeah, it's important you get all the numbers right, the context.
That doesn't mean anything to say that Exxon made 80%, so we should hate Exxon, or
yeah, that's why we do studies and show, well, how much charity care did they provide, and then what's the size of the cash reserves. Our study we're working on now is we're looking at what's the growth in the CEO's pay relative to the amount of charity care, and then there's a research group at Johns Hopkins, and they've compared, they're not for profit, right? So they got a huge tax break that HCA has to pay, right? And so you can estimate the size of the tax break and compare it to the amount of community benefit that they contributed. And the tax break is substantially larger than what they gave back to the community. So if you get to have a tax break because you're nonprofit, and originally we gave these institutions nonprofit status because we thought they would take care of the community, and they're just not. And they'll say, oh, it's because we had to, pay nurses more. And that's one of the things we want to get around to. Sure, they paid nurses more, but there's still this gigantic profits that, sitting left over that they need to give back to the community.
So then the extra profit must be going to their debt payments on these loans that they're using to build, instead of spending down their held cash, because they're trying to protect the cash so they can continue to borrow.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what has happened with the interest rate so high,
Right.
but when they were low, and if you got double,
their profit margin, who cares what the interest rate?
yeah.
I think in a market like this, interest rates are higher, they're going to build if they think they have a chance to grab more market share. They'll be later when things go down again.
Yeah.
Vivian, I think 2 more questions and then questions for Danielle.
For me, the fundamental issue is that the doctor-patient relationship is one based on trust. And we play the system in order to secure a set of doctors that can provide the services that we believe are going to give us what we want, which is health, good health. And they're the ones who have the expertise and the knowledge, and there's a gatekeeper between us. And this is not going to be fixed, because we will tell our employers, once we've established that trust relationship, we don't care what it takes to retain that trust relationship. I do not want to go to another dentist. I don't want to go find another rheumatologist when I have built a relationship with these people and it's working. And just to go to an app and say, I can go find an MRI somewhere, I don't want to do that. I want to go to the expert. And as long as we've built a system where we have people who are more compelled by dollar cost averaging than by providing health for the American people, we are not going to solve this problem. This should be a universal gift to everyone, and the people in charge of it should be the ones with the most education about how to provide it.
Yeah, I agree. This is a very difficult problem, and I'm not sure, simple things are gonna, fix things overnight. I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. And it's, he's now retired from Baylor College of Medicine. But Dr. Greenberg, he told me when I first came to Houston, he said, we love universal health insurance. He said, we're not going to get it until the majority of doctors want it. And maybe we're getting there. I have all sorts of chronic health issues, because I'm a cancer survivor. And so every time I go in to see the specialist, they go, oh, hey, Vivian's here. Let's go and tell her all of our stories of the things, and they tell me, and they feel so bad about the system. I don't blame this on any of the physicians. They hate what's going on. And that's the other way we could go. And it would work, but you're going to have some people saying, but I want my Methodist system and I don't care how much it costs. We've got just tremendous problems in terms of disparity. So that's going to be a very politically difficult, politically charged issue. There was one more comment.
How much I've been going to the same doctor for, 40 some odd years. And he's at Kelsey's Eagle. And I get the sense that their insurance and their liability insurance goes up, and there's a carrot of working. I just got a note from insurance saying, was your hip replacement because of etc., that the insurance is paying their liability, and how much of a motivation is that? I don't know if that made any sense at all. I know that physicians have
Their
malpractice insurance, and put a carrot in front of a small physician's group easily and say, we'll pay all of this insurance that you're obligated to pay if you join our group.
Yeah. So interesting you bring up Kelsey Sewbold. So I went to go see one of the specialists I see is an ear surgeon at Baylor College of Medicine. And I did not know this. I thought, oh, Kelsey Sewbold is this independent group. So it turned out that up until 2 years ago, they were owned by a private equity company. And they have since sold to United Healthcare.
Yeah.
And they used to run clinics, and now they want to open a hospital because, a hospital is going to make more money. And so they went to my Baylor physician and they gave him this whole spiel. They brought in the doctors who had partial ownership under private equity. And they said, look how much money we made. And you can be a part of this too. And they were going to offer him even more money to switch over to Kelsey. He's not going for now. But he said, when he goes to a professional meeting, they're no longer talking about clinical discoveries. They're all talking with each other about who in their community offered them more money to move and how much money they could make. It's frightening.
Well, thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Vivian, for your wonderful presentation. I hope you all can join us in the next couple of weeks as Deacon Ben leads us towards Rally Day, his experience on his sabbatical, and finally, the experience that many of our youths and their parents had during the Leipzig trip this year. So God bless you all, and we'll see you in worship shortly.